Well, another day, on to another project. Today we have a genuine 2007 Honda TRX400EX, and it runs. This ATV has an issue with the rear carrier bearings, and it smokes a little bit when you first start it up. In fact, I can smell a little bit of oil burning. So the things we're going to get into in this video is obviously repairing the rear carrier assembly, whether it needs to be replaced or just the bearings. We may be pulling this top end apart and doing some measurements on the piston, the cylinder, the rings, valve seals, redoing the head, blah blah blah. And obviously we're going to go through it and do all the maintenance that hasn't been done in so many years. So if that interests you, you might want to stick around, because there's going to be lots of information in this video. So she's burning oil, that's for sure. Well, it's a drizzly day here in North Georgia, which is a good time to be inside getting some work done. However, the humidity is still up pretty bad, so not comfortable. And it's also Sunday, which means I should probably be spending time with my family. So we're just going to do a quick walk around on this thing, and then we'll get to it tomorrow. So the front tires have seen better days, but they're not too bad. Definitely looks like it's been sitting outside for a little time anyway. Back tire is really good shape. Plastics are not bad. There is a little bit of Frankenstein going on back here. They certainly have the rear brakes off, and they've been messing around with this carrier, so we'll see what we have to fix, what they broke first, before we even get into fixing what needs to be fixed. Aftermarket slip-on, it looks like. Factory head pipe. Obviously the rear brakes are not going to work because they're not hooked up. The lights work. The horn works. Front brake works, but just barely. I mean, the lever's fine, it just doesn't have any stopping power, so these front pads are probably shot. And the front end feels all tight, so shouldn't have to get into much in that respects as far as tie rod ends and ball joints. Alright, so we know what we're looking at. I don't think this one's going to be all that difficult for sure, but we'll get it torn down and get a bunch of parts ordered for it and get this thing back to its former glory, or at least a shadow of what was. Oh, there's actually a filter in there. Not really hooked up. Got holes in it. No oil. Man, my engine's smoking on startup. I don't know why. I've always taken such good care of it. If I'm going to be honest with you, and this is coming from the heart, if you clean your air filter, change your oil, do your basic maintenance, this bike will last you forever. I mean, figuratively speaking. These engines are almost bulletproof. So if you got a worn cylinder and the thing's smoking and everything else, it's almost undoubtedly lack of maintenance. You can't suck dirt in through here into your engine and expect it not to wear. So as you see, we pull the air filter out, no oil in it, got holes in it, not even screwed down, and it doesn't even have the cage in it. you might as well just throw it out. It's not doing anything. Alright, well, let's get all these plastics off so we can get at this top end. All the foul odor of ethanol fuel. Man, I'll tell you, I can't wait for winter. I've had enough of this humidity to last me forever. Nice thing is September we start cooling off pretty nicely at night. Just got to deal with this one more month, and I know the whole country's dealing with a lot of crazy heat right now, and it could definitely be worse, but I don't like it. We'll give that carburetor a clean later. Definitely nasty. Burning some oil, running rich. First thing we're going to do, bring it up to top dead center on the compression stroke. If you stick a screwdriver down in a spark plug hole, rotate your engine. You'll feel when it gets to the top. You'll know you're on the top of the compression stroke when all of your valves are closed. Unless they're too tight, they should have a little bit of play. Next, I'm going to pull off my head pipe, and then we're going to pull off our timing chain tensioner. Your zip tie around your cam chain, so if it falls down the side, you're in good shape. So there's your camshaft. You got to pull that little pin off the side so you can sneak that bearing out. Now go ahead and take our cylinder head off. Nasty. Come on, baby. Put a rag over your crankcase so you don't drop your circlip down inside. Makes for a bad day. Alright, we're going to replace this top end anyway, but let's just take a look and see what our ring gaps look like. I'll tell you right now, that's way over spec. I don't even know what the spec is off the top of my head, but I don't even really need to look at it. I mean, I pretty much just about maxed out my feeler gauges and the gap's too big. Got the same thing with the second one. Has gapped out more than Lawrence Fishburne's teeth. That ain't gonna work. It's gonna whistle. So more than likely we're gonna have the same issue with our oil control rings. Let's just take a cylinder measurement. Got 3.3480 or 81. So according to Honda's wizardry, inside diameter of the cylinder service limit is 3.350. So according to this, we're still in spec on this cylinder. Maybe able to just re-ring it, but let me take a measurement on the piston and see where we're at here. Outside diameter measurement at 15 millimeters from the bottom. Minimum spec is going to be 3.3449. So I got 3.344, just about 3.345. So this piston is just about at its minimum spec. Although all this stuff seems to be in spec, and I could probably just throw a set of rings in it, I think I'm just going to go ahead and replace this cylinder and piston as a kit, and then this thing will be fresh on the top end. I got my parts to redo my top end. New cylinder. New piston. Set of rings, circlip, and wrist pin. I also got a complete engine gasket kit. Don't really need it. I just needed a top end kit, but it was out of stock. And what I need is the valve seals so we can rebuild this head. And the rest of the stuff I'll just throw in the old parts cabinet. Who knows when you're going to need it. So although this is a kit, the first thing I want to do is check my ring end gaps, clearances, to make sure that they're in spec and they're not going to be too tight. Now, as you can probably see, compared to the old gap, that's quite a bit better. Now the clearance for the top ring is 0.20 to 0.35 millimeter. What I'll do is start with 0.20 millimeter, and then I'll try the 0.35, and as long as it falls within that zone, we're good. 0.20 slides right through. 0.35 does not go in. So the top ring falls within spec. If you look on your piston rings, they're usually a mark, have a dot or a marking of some sort. This one says STD for standard size. Now the second ring is 0.35 to 0.50. So we'll start with our 0.35. Goes right through. And as long as 0.50 does not go through, these rings are ready to install. and it will not go in at all. So perfect. I'll just check the oil control rings too, just to be sure, but usually don't have a problem with those. And the spec on those is 0.20 to 0.70, anywhere in that realm. To finish prepping the cylinder, what we need to do is swap these studs over to this cylinder. And in this particular case, if you wanted to grab these flat spots with vice grips, you could probably do that. A lot of cases you don't have access to a flat part of the bolt. All you have is threads, and if you put vice grips on threads, you're going to ruin them. So an easy way to get these studs out is going to be to use 2 nuts. These threads happen to be 10 by 1.25. You can use the original acorn nut. And if you tighten these 2 nuts up against each other, then you can back the bottom nut out and it will pull the stud out. And it will also not damage your threads. Now I got one of my circlips in. Before I get my piston pin in, I find it easiest to install this piston in the cylinder prior to hooking it up to the connecting rod, because you're not fumbling around with holding this heavy cylinder and trying to get all these rings and crankshaft going down, blah blah blah. So what we want to do is keep our orientation. Obviously it says intake or timing chain on this bike is on the right hand side, so this is going to be the exhaust side, this is going to be the intake side, this is how our piston is going to go in. So what we'll do is flip this over, and following that same orientation, we're going to wiggle these piston rings into the cylinder. A cylinder ring compression tool would definitely come in handy here, but it's not necessary. It's going to take your time and wiggle them in. Now trying to do this while the piston is connected to the connecting rod is difficult, because the connecting rod wants to move up and down and sometimes can be a real pain. So unfortunately this is as far as we can go. On most of the motocross bikes there's actually a cutout here where you can actually get the rings sitting in a little bit more, but they're in far enough where we should be able to slide our piston pin in. Even if they got to come back out just a smidge. So now we're ready for this. We just take this whole assembly and drop it down, push our pin through our connecting rod, get our circlip on it, and then we can just slide the whole cylinder and piston down. Put your rag and get your other circlip in, and now we can slide this cylinder down. Next we'll get our cylinder bolts in and torque down. Want to get a little bit of oil on the threads as well as the washers. Next we're going to tighten our head bolts down to 33 foot-pounds, but we're going to do it in a couple of stages. So we'll do it at 10, 20, and 33, and we're going to do them in a cross pattern. Now once we get her torqued, we'll get her back on top dead center. You're going to have to hold your timing chain so it doesn't bind on the gear. And we'll rotate it clockwise. Feels nice and smooth. Now, since I've been doing this for a long time, I can feel when the piston's at its topmost travel. The resistance when you're turning this as the piston's going up and down feels a certain way. And then once you get to the top, it actually feels like really loose. So you can feel that you're at the top dead center. If you need to be 100% sure, which you really should be, there's a plug on the side of the stator cover, and you'll take that off and there'll be a mark on your flywheel that'll line up with the stator cover. That'll show you when you're on top dead center. And we need to be on top dead center to install our cylinder head. All right, let's get the cylinder head sorted. First, to the parts washer. Also, just a reminder, before you go flipping this head around too much, there's a spring and a pin down inside this hole. Don't lose it. Make sure it gets back in there. Biggest thing you want to remember when using surface reconditioning discs is a very, very light pressure and a fine disc. We're just trying to take the old gasket material off and give it a nice clean surface. We don't want to be reshaping anything and taking off too much metal. Now, as far as the valves are concerned, we're going to take this over and clean them up on a brass wire wheel really lightly. And we're going to chuck them up in our drill to check to make sure that they're not bent. And we'll just clean them up finally with a Scotch-Brite. Well, I looked in my parts cabinet. It turns out I had a whole new set of valves, springs, and keepers for this engine. So we'll just go ahead and use those, and I'll throw these back in the cabinet in case in the future we need to use one. But they did clean up nice. I didn't hit them with the Scotch-Brite or anything like that, but the valves definitely have some wear. What we need to do is we're going to lap these new valves into our head, and I'll show you how to do that, and that'll show us what our seats look like. So for this, we're going to need a valve lapping spindle, which is a piece of wood with a couple of suction cups on the side. I hate using these things. They don't really work that well. You get any kind of grease or anything, or even any of this valve grinding compound on the face of the valve or on the bottom of the valve, this thing will just slip all over the place. Luckily, I have a lot of room in this one, and I'm going to do it with a drill. Now, once we lap these, we want to keep our orientation so the valves go back in the exact same spot. We're going to start with the exhaust valves right now. This is a very abrasive paste, and we'll put this all on the face of the valve, and then we're just going to lap it in. And what that is we're just going to run this abrasive paste across the valve seat, or the valve face, and the valve seat, and see where the valves sit on the seat itself. Like using a couple of drops of oil on the stem. So traditionally, and if you have no access, this is how you have to do it. You'll stick this little spindle to this, and just go back and forth. But like I said, they just want to pop off. So if I don't have to do that, I don't want to do that. What I like doing this is chucking this up in my drill, and just very lightly. Now we can do this since it is a steel valve and they're not coated. Titanium valves, you want to avoid this. It'll take the coating off the valve. So if you look at the valve face, there's a dark gray line, and that shows where it is contacting the seat. This is right where it's supposed to be, right in the center of this. It is a little bit wide, so these seats are definitely worn, but it's not something that I won't be able to use for this rebuild without sending it off and having the seats recut. So we just need to do this to all 4 valves, and again, maintain their orientation. So if it came out of here, put it right back in that position, because it's now matched to the seat. Now that I've got all this stuff lapped in, there's a critical step here. Take this stuff and wash it very well, either in the parts washer, hot soapy water, brake clean, something. We want to get all this abrasive out of here, because if this abrasive gets down inside the engine, it's going to do the same thing it's doing with the valves. It's going to tear it up. Let's get our new valve seals installed. Don't forget about your spring seats. If you don't put these in, the springs will wear the head right down. I just want to seat these keepers now, so I just got the head up on a couple of blocks not to interfere with the valves. I'm going to lightly tap the 4 of these on the top. Now put our head nuts back on. Take note that there's a larger washer. This one's going to go in the front on the outside of the engine. And of course the rusty nut's going to go out there too. Next we'll tighten these just like we did with the cylinder bolts to 33 foot-pounds. We'll do it in 3 stages, and we'll do it in a cross pattern. Now your piston shouldn't have moved since we put this on. This is where it becomes critical that you make sure you're on top dead center. If you look in this cover, there's a line on the flywheel and it's got a T next to it. When that's lined up with this cover, you're on top dead center. Next, to install our camshaft, we need to pull our bearings back off again. Take note of the orientation of how they came off. So here's our camshaft and our timing marks. You have 3 marks on this camshaft. Now with this thing at top dead center, the 2 outer lines should line directly up with the cylinder head, and the index line at the top will point up and away from the cylinder. When you're on top dead center and the front of your chain is tight, that's what your timing mark should look like on your cam. Put a little oil here, there, and everywhere. You especially want to get oil on these camshaft journals. And you can get the cam lobes as well. Now we're going to tighten these 6mm bolts in a cross pattern. The manual does not give a torque spec on them, so we'll just snug them up. The 8mm bolt does say 17 foot-pounds. Now to retract your timing chain tensioner, take your little cover bolt off the back with a small slotted screwdriver, and you're going to turn it clockwise. And once you turn it all the way, it should lock in place. Once it's tightened up, put your screwdriver back in and just turn it a little bit counterclockwise, and the spring will push the plunger out. Replace your cover. Break all your rocker adjustment lock nuts loose and back them off till there's some play. Specs on these are going to be 0.10 millimeter on the intake, 0.12 millimeter on the exhaust. I've got a 0.10 and a 0.13, which is definitely close enough. And what we want to do is get between the top of the valve head and the bottom of this adjuster. A little tricky to sneak them in there. You can also sneak it in between the 2 rockers. Sometimes a little tough to get down in there. You're going to tighten the screw portion up until your adjuster just drags through. Hold it in that position, snug up your lock nut. Now remember, we're doing all this stuff on top dead center, so once you get it in there, make sure it slides through. 0.10 on the intake, 0.12 on the exhaust. Now this engine oil on this ATV has never been changed since brand new, and I know that because of the way it is. This is some dark sludgy oil, so we're getting it out of here. There's a drain plug right underneath the stator cover that drains the crankcase, and then you want to remove the drain plug on the bottom of your oil tank. Obviously change your oil filter. Now more than likely I'm going to run this for a little bit and change the oil again. It's really bad. Now once it's done draining, I'll put the drain plug back in. I've already changed out the filter. We're going to fill it through the oil tank on the top here. I use the Shell Rotella, the T4 15W40 diesel engine oil. Beautiful stuff, super cheap. You can change your oil super often, and this calls for 1.95 US quarts, so we'll put like 1.8 in there. We'll run it for a little while and recheck it, but like I said, I'm probably going to change it again anyway, so I'm not going to be too worried about the oil level as long as it's fairly full. The old Tusky even comes with a set of gloves. There you are, just a light coating of oil, trap the fine dust. This is not a factory air filter cage, it's an aftermarket high flow one. The reason I purchased it was pretty simple, it's quite a bit cheaper than the factory one. And it'll probably flow a little bit more air since it doesn't have the screen inside. While I had the access, I pulled the carburetor apart, cleaned it up real good. It was pretty dirty on the outside, but inside was not bad. But blew through everything, looks pretty good, got it back together. Body panels put back on, oil changed. Let's hit this thing with a little bit of no E. So I guess we'll try and see if we can get it to fire up. Ran before, so I hope it runs this time. Shut it down, let it sit for a few moments. We're going to double check our oil to make sure that we have enough in there. You know, the pump's going to obviously pump it into the engine and actually pump it up into the oil filter as well, so the reservoir will drop a little bit. So recheck that. As always, you know I appreciate you watching, commenting, liking, subscribing, sharing the videos. Definitely helps promote the channel and doesn't cost you anything. I know the ATV needs some more work and we're going to get to all that stuff, so I think what I'm going to do is split it up into 2 videos. Next week's video, you'll see the rear axle repair. So stay tuned for that if that interests you. Again, appreciate each and every one of you, and we'll see you on the next one.